6, 7. We have 2 topics for 90 minutes. Hopefully we don't take up all 90 minutes. We're going to flip those 2 topics and do the discussion of potential topics for FY 2016 audit plan first. But since we're going to have a further opportunity to discuss before we actually adopt the 2016 audit plan, I have made a request to Teresa to, if possible, do the presentation in about 5 minutes and just to take a few very basic questions from board members and then move on to the next topic. Thank you.
Okay, we'll try to do as good as we did last month. Last month we made up some time. I'm going to give you the approximate time frame that we have established for the audit plan, so that'll give you some perspective of how much time we have going. From now through April and May, we're going to be gathering topics at the May Audit Committee meeting, which is May 27th. We will start discussing the potential topics for the plan, a draft plan to be adopted and presented to the Audit Committee in June at their meeting on the 24th. The school board will see the draft plan at their July 9th school board meeting as new business, with a work session on July 13th, and then action follows on July 23rd. What we have for you is 3 documents. I'm going to focus on the document that they've pulled up for us, which is a listing of potential audits, and then I'll describe the other 2 documents for you because they're fairly self-explanatory, but I'll explain what the purpose was. In this document for potential audits, you've got a brief definition of audit, a definition of performance audit, financial audit, and then you have a list of performance audits that are being recommended separated by department. So what would be the key department we would be dealing with, knowing that there is crossover in all of these? Most of our audits cross over into financial services all the time. It's something that's just the nature of an audit. Crossover into budget as well as other areas, but these are the primary departments, and you will find a list of audits for each department. Some of these audits we have done in the past, but can be done again because of changes that have happened. But to give you some perspective as timing and what else is there, there's 2 supplemental documents for you. One is a listing of audits that have been conducted by the FCPS Internal Audit Office. And I have next to those audits, and that's the listing of completed audits for you. It would be the second attachment in there. The audits that are listed there are listed as those currently in progress, which you will find the turnover audits, contract management, construction audit, time and attendance accounting. Most of those will be going to audit committee in the next month or so, either this month or next month. You'll find the audits that we've completed over the years, and in the parentheses is the year they were completed. You go to that fiscal year on the website, and there's a link to the website in the document, and you can see the entire report. And then you have the individual audits we've done. Some were done on a cycle, such as procurement cards, athletic funds, etc., and we're not continuing to do those for various reasons, and that's described. And then it lists other types of tasks that we've done, as well as the financial audits. And the financial audits are the summer audit only. The other tasks being follow-ups, and then the state efficiency review, the organizational risk assessment, etc. So that tells you what we've done in the last several years. And then the final document is just a chart that lists the audits that other school districts have conducted. A lot of times you ask me, well, what does everybody else do? Well, this shows you, and we didn't go to a lot of school districts. I think I have a dozen here. And it shows you the types of audits that those school divisions have done. And there's a lot of crossover between what you see that they have done and what we've done in the past, and also some of the audits on our list. It's not that we went to their website and said, oh, they're doing that, let's do that. That's just the nature of a school division and the nature of an audit. You look at the areas of the largest risk or the areas of biggest concern, and they're the areas you focus your time on. Risk is not necessarily those areas of largest dollar. You have to also consider not only your dollar risk, but your public perception risk, your reputation risk, and all of those areas as well. What I would recommend as a rule of thumb, as you go through and you start looking at the areas of potential audit, the goal here is to give you things to think about, that might jog some other topics that you might be interested in for recommendation to the audit committee to be included on the audit plan for next year. As a rule of thumb, we have 5 full-time auditors as of today. Assume 1 large-scale audit per person, and that's any one of the audits listing on here. Depending on the scope of what we look at, these audits could be as small as 400 hours or greater than 1,000 hours. Some of the audits we've just recently conducted took 8 to 9 months, and it just has to do with the nature and the volume of work. So if you focus on about 5 topics off of the potential list or 5 other topics you come up with, supplement that, we supplement it with our summer audit with the schools and the business process turnover audits, and also build in some time in the audit plan for special projects at the request of the board or anybody else, keeping in mind that as we move through the year, we can always add things to the plan if it looks like we're going to have additional time or if we get additional resources. It's very easy to add additional topics later on. So we don't have to make sure you have a dozen things. You focus on 1 large audit per full-time auditor. We'll supplement with some of the smaller audits, and that'll also leave time for special projects for the board. Any questions or things that I could clarify?
Mrs. McLaughlin.
So I hope I'm not jumping in prematurely with this question, but as everybody knows, we did receive a risk assessment that was done. And so what I would like to understand is, in terms of potential audits that we would conduct, what would be the professional recommendation coming out of the school board auditor office in terms of what is mission critical? And I recall that we had to have some closed session conversations because of what might be sensitive information about risk to the system. So would that also come into play? But I just think it's really essential. We've got an auditing staff who have the risk assessment itself. And Dr. Horton, I know you were heading that up, and so if you'd like to speak to that as well. But I just think it's really important that the board takes the advice of its auditing office. And you all, I would hope, feel that you're in that position to be able to say to us, okay, here's some potential audit projects, but in the end, I would first want to hear from all of you. It would be our recommendation that what's most mission critical is this. And so have those conversations happened yet? Is it that it happened with the audit committee? And, but if not, then that's, I think, the first starting point when you're talking about projects is you tell us what's mission critical and what should we be lasering in on.
You want to answer? Go ahead.
Yes, the purpose of this set of information here is to start to give you all some ideas, because the risk assessment process, as you rightly note, we have gone through a risk assessment, but annually the audit shop will be going through a risk assessment process to determine what really is the most high risk and high value for us to be looking at this year. And so the answer is yes. The short answer, we would be looking at that risk assessment to find out, okay, what did they say in the past? And eventually those risk assessments will be updated at some point, so there will be some refreshed information for us to take a look at. But eventually, in the next couple of months, what we would plan to do in the audit office is to be able to have for the audit committee a draft plan that takes all of this information, and then also takes information from the senior leaders within the organization, from board members, et cetera, and then presents something to the audit committee for a final assessment and a formal assessment.
Okay, so again, I just think, I know I would greatly appreciate whether it needs to happen in open or closed session, that kind of conversation, just as you stated, Chris, what is mission critical and what's of high value to spend time on.
Ms. McLaughlin, when this was developed, we were looking at those areas of risk and looking at areas that would impact the highest risk areas. What will also impact the audit will be what management does in order to address those risks. So anything that they're doing to address those areas of risk or areas that we would consider for audit, but a lot of that is still work in progress.
Any other board member? If not, thank you so much. We'll go to the next topic.
Thank you.
Thank you. For the math curriculum presentation, should I call upon Dr. Garza to start off, or?
The presentation, the study that you're about to have presented to you all by Dr. Sockwell and the team came as a result of, maybe it was my first year on board when we started to look at admissions to some of our specialized programming such as TJ, and really starting to reflect some of the key questions that we had about our math curriculum, about access, opportunity, equity, really looking at some of that. So that precipitated some of the, I think, earlier work in looking at our mathematics programming. This happened sometime back because I just asked for it to be part of our program evaluation cycle so that we could ask and answer some of these questions. But as the audit committee continued to do their work, we felt like this would be a study that maybe would be the first kind of try to see whether or not program evaluation in terms of major program evaluations in terms of major scope, major cost, those could come to the audit committee. So I'll just tell you, this is the first time we've done this before. As it relates to, this was presented to our audit committee. We had a lively, I think, interesting discussion there with the audit committee. This study was done earlier this year, but again, like I said, we were changing the kind of the scope of audit about the same time we were doing this study. So it's really just the first one, but we do anticipate and have recommended 4 different studies to be considered in the 16 audit plan that we felt like met the criteria with regard to scope. So it's just the first one. Assuming you all like this direction and want to have these more regularly, I would assume that the audit committee would bring forward the plan with the 4 additional studies for next year. So that's kind of what precipitated this particular study, and I think that you'll find some of the information interesting and really pertinent as it relates to some of that earlier conversations that we've had. So with that, I don't know, Marty or
Sure.
Mr. Smith or...
Thank you, Dr. Garza. So good afternoon, everyone. We're excited to bring the math study to you this afternoon. I have with me here Ricardo Sockwell, who's the director of the Office of Program Evaluation, and we also have Lydia Haruda and Michelle Ferrer, who are specialists in that office. They're going to walk through the presentation today, and we can go ahead and, as you can see, the purpose of today's presentation is to support your understanding of the major findings from a series of 4 studies. So we have a summary of those 4 studies today, and then the recommendations to the superintendent that stem from the study's findings. And so with that, I will turn it over to the team.
Okay. So as Dr. Garza said, the study came out of a discussion that the school board had, and there were 2 things that in that discussion that the study looked at in particular. One was to look at the overall quality of FCPS's curriculum, and that was just to make sure that the foundation of what our students are getting was strong. And we were looking in particular at the rigor of the curriculum, the relevance, and the sequencing of it. And then the second part was to look in particular about whether students who were pursuing some of our accelerated or enriched math were benefiting from that experience. The conversation was around whether or not students were in some ways being inhibited or limited by those experiences when they moved on to Algebra 2. So we were looking in particular at those things. As with all of our projects in the Office of Program Evaluation, we used a team of central office and school-based staff to help us with the study, and their names are up there. Most of them are here with us today as well. And they helped us with things like advice on some of the critical issues, as well as data collection that would be as least burdensome as possible for our staff. And they also reviewed and provided us with feedback on the 4 reports that Marty mentioned. So what did the study investigate? We were interested in looking at 3 things in particular, and we were looking at it from elementary school on into high school. We looked at the quality of the curriculum, and in particular, we were looking at the written curriculum, or our program of studies. And we know that instruction is just as important, and they kind of work in tandem, but for this study, we were focused on the written curriculum in particular. We also looked at opportunities for enrichment and acceleration that our students receive. And those are things like advanced math in our elementary grades or honors or AP courses later on in middle school and high school. And then lastly, we looked at the connection of receiving those opportunities with academic performance of students. And as Marty mentioned, that resulted in these 4 analytic reports, and today we'll be focusing on sort of the high-level highlights of it for you. We collected data from a variety of sources. We did a curriculum analysis, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We also got some survey results from parents, teachers, students, and asked our schools for some information. We also wanted to understand what teachers felt and their concerns, so we did some focus groups to get some more in-depth information from them. And then we got student performance data and student enrollment data that's available through our testing and our information technology offices. So I'm going to talk first about the curriculum and what our question was here and what the key findings were. So the question here was, does FCPS have a relevant, rigorous, and well-sequenced curriculum that prepares all our students for higher level mathematics? And in particular, we were looking, as I said, at how students were doing once they got to Algebra 2 or pre-calculus classes. So the findings come from a report that we brought in a consultant, and I will hold this up. We actually have a whole report from the consultant. And the consultant team came from a company called CMSI that we contracted with to do this audit of our curriculum. And they come out of work by Fenwick English, which some of you may be familiar with, and they're nationally recognized experts at doing this kind of work. So when they did their audit, they were looking in particular at whether or not the standards that we have in our curriculum matched or didn't match certain benchmarks. And they used 2 benchmarks. They used a national benchmark, which was the Common Core, which is what's most commonly used in the United States and most of our states. And they also used Finland, or the Finnish curriculum, which, as you know, and as we've looked at with Finnish lessons, is very highly regarded and has scored very highly on PISA tests. And what they found was that in relation to our Algebra 2 curriculum and our pre-calc curriculum, 92 to 100% of our standards matched what they found in Common Core, and 96 to 100% of the standards matched what was in the Finnish curriculum. So we had a strong alignment, and they concluded that our curriculum was very relevant. They also looked at the sequencing of our curriculum, and they found that there really were no gaps. You could move through our curriculum from the early grades on up into Algebra 2, and there were no gaps or concerns that you wouldn't be well prepared for Algebra 2 once you got there. They did, however, raise some concerns, and these concerns come from trying to make our curriculum stronger. They felt it was a strong curriculum, but what could we do to make it stronger? So the first thing was around the rigor in the regular curriculum. As you know, our program of studies has what are considered essential or expected standards, and then they also have extended standards. And the extended standards are the ones that are typically taught in our advanced classes and are also sometimes provided to some of our students receiving regular curriculum. And they felt like the strongest rigor in our curriculum was in those extended standards. So things like application or trying to think like a mathematician or use math like a mathematician might use it, those were found in the extended standards, so they were concerned that our regular curriculum without those standards wasn't as strong as it might be. They also talked about the balance between procedural and conceptual knowledge. And this is not something that's unique to FCPS. Our SOL has the same concern, and usually throughout the country there is a concern around the balance. But the procedural knowledge would be something like knowing how to actually add fractions like 1/3 plus 1/2 and understanding that how to get a common denominator and add those two together. And then the conceptual knowledge would be more around understanding what a fraction is and why you have to change the denominator in order to add those two numbers together. So their concern was something around how FCPS might be able to strengthen that, even though that is something that commonly happens with curriculum. A third concern they raised was around sequence gaps. And I just said a couple minutes ago that They found no gaps in our curriculum, and that's true. But what they did note was that some of our common practices in terms of moving our students into advanced math create some gaps. And they create gaps because as our students move from regular grade math into advanced math, they typically skip a year. So when you go from grade 2 regular math to advanced math in 3rd grade, you're actually taking the 4th grade curriculum, so you're missing 3rd grade. And each time students do it, no matter what grade it's at, they skip over something. And then lastly, a specific concern of the school board was around the TJ curriculum and the overlap between pre-calculus and the AP calculus offerings at the school. And they did note that there was a big overlap and there was a lot of redundancy in the curriculum. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle.
I'm going to talk to you about the role of opportunities in our curriculum. The two key questions that we addressed were, what are the perceptions of stakeholders about enrichment acceleration, to try to get a context for how students and teachers perceive opportunities for enrichment and acceleration, and then how are the opportunities provided to students in FCPS. As I said before, this was really intended for us to get a better understanding of what were the beliefs around acceleration and enrichment. What we found when we surveyed parents and students in 41 schools that were part of this study, the majority of our parents and students have expectations for college-level coursework by the time they graduate. Obviously, to meet those expectations, they will have to, at some point, accelerate their curriculum pathway. Because to get to college-level math, you cannot be in Algebra 2 in 11th grade, which is the standard pathway. Conversely, our schools and our teachers report some practices or experiences that support limiting some students' access to accelerated opportunities. The majority of teachers think that students should take Algebra 2 or pre-calculus as the expectation for the highest math course taken by graduation. So as you can see, this relates to some differences in beliefs or how quickly students may need to progress through math, and it's going to relate to a concept called productive struggle that we'll discuss later. First, what I'm going to do anytime we get a graph is I'm going to tell you basically what the graph says and then the key takeaway. So let me orient you to what this graph shows. First, what you have here are all the students in grades 3 through 6 back in 2013, and they're sorted by how much quantitative aptitude they had based on their COGAT score back in grade 2. So we've grouped them into below average aptitude, average quantitative aptitude, and above average quantitative aptitude. I'm going to focus us in the bar on the far right. All of these students have above average quantitative aptitude. The students in the green are those that are receiving advanced math. The students in the blue are those that are receiving grade level math. One would expect that all of the students who are above average in quantitative aptitude would be receiving advanced math, but from this we can see that's not the case. This, coupled with some other information we gathered from schools and the criteria that they use to identify students for acceleration, we know that they are using criteria that's beyond aptitude when making decisions about student access to acceleration and enrichment at the elementary level. We did find that also to be somewhat the case at middle school, although there is open enrollment, but it played into how they recommend students for courses. Once they're placed into a particular grade level or advanced math grouping, we ask schools how much of the extended indicators does that particular student group receive. So what you have here is a chart that basically graphs the school's responses by the type of school. On the far left are our schools that have AAP centers, in the middle are the schools with local level 4, and on the far right are our schools that have neither local level or AAP. I'm going to focus on the two bars in green. These are both groups of students that are level 4 advanced academics students. Neither of these bars are at the all level. The expectation in FCPS is students that are level 4 receiving advanced math receive instruction on all of the extended indicators. You can see that those in the AAP elementary receive more than those that are in a local level 4, but neither meet the expectation. So what we're seeing is not only is there variation in placement criteria, but there's variation in the amount of instruction you receive on the extended indicators once you are placed. Okay, I'm going to get to what I believe is one of the key questions that you have. How are these opportunities associated with student performance? Parent and student expectations for course taking imply that they believe acceleration is beneficial. However, this board expressed a concern, and we wanted to reflect on some of the impacts of those practices for our students. Okay. On this chart, you have a variety of pass rates. This is across grades 3 through 6 in math from spring 2013. And the students, again, are sorted by quantitative aptitude. I'm going to focus you on the students that have average aptitude, which is the third bar in from the right. These student groups have the same amount of quantitative aptitude. Those in the blue are receiving grade level math. Those that are in the red are receiving advanced math. Now, we do have high pass rates overall, but you can see a difference just in having that different opportunity. So although they have the same quantitative aptitude, we have some different results in terms of performance. And you can see, to a lesser extent, some differences for groups that are above average and significantly above average in quantitative aptitude. And we see some of those same patterns at the middle school level. We wanted to follow these students into middle school to see what the opportunity in elementary school did in terms of their opportunities when they get to middle school. This chart also groups students by quantitative aptitude. I'm going to focus on the bars in the middle. Those are where the majority of our students are, the students that have average aptitude. And the bar on the left are the students that were in grade level math in elementary school, and the bar on the right are those that are in advanced math. So you can see that even though a student had grade level math in elementary school, when they get to 7th grade, about 27% of those students do opt for accelerating through open enrollment and enrolling in Math 7 honors, and that's the purple circle. Compared to those that had had advanced math in elementary school, a much greater proportion of those students continue on that accelerated pathway, 71%. So we kind of see having advanced math in the elementary school is somewhat of a gateway to continuing on that accelerated pathway in middle school. So although there is open enrollment, it doesn't fully compensate for some of those differences in opportunities at elementary school. Now this chart, we wanted to follow them to the end of middle school to see what is the impact on performance as they transition into high school, where although there is open enrollment, it's harder to accelerate once you are in high school. So this shows just for that group of students in the average aptitude band. So all of these students have comparable aptitude. The bars, what they show is performance based on what course they were enrolled in. And I'm going to focus on the two circles. Those are students that are both enrolled in Algebra 1 in 8th grade. So on the left-hand side are the students that were in grade level math in elementary school, and you can see 91% of those students had a pass proficient score on the Algebra 1 test, compared to those that were in advanced math in elementary school, also were in Algebra 1 at the end of 8th grade, and their performance says 93% were at the pass proficient level. So the key here is the opportunity. Once those students, no matter what the opportunity they had in elementary school, if we can get them into an accelerated pathway and they're getting comparable levels of rigor, they perform at equally high levels. And you can see the similar pattern for Algebra 1 honors. The last chart focuses on the Algebra 2 performance, and this is a graduation requirement for our students. Many of our students get beyond this, but all of our students have to pass this or a comparable test by graduation. There is a bar drawn at the 400 mark, and that's the cut score that they need to reach to be at that pass level. The different bars represent when in their course taking, at what grade level they took Algebra 2, and it gives you a sense of acceleration. The dark blue band are students that take Algebra 2 in 9th grade. We tend to call them hyper-accelerated because they're 2 grade levels ahead. The red are those that take it in 10th grade. We consider them accelerated. The purple is in 11th grade on the regular trajectory, and the last bar are those that take it in 12th grade. So as you can see, and what we have represented in our average scale scores, the more accelerated you are, the higher the level of performance we are seeing. So these students don't seem to be harmed by the acceleration pathway, and it's consistent across the different groups. I do want to draw to your attention those that are on the regular pathway or even the late pathway, their average performance really is cutting the line with hitting that 400 pass mark. So if you never have acceleration or enrichment in your pathway to the Algebra 2 test score, these students may struggle to meet this graduation requirement.
So I'm going to hit at some of the summary points and then talk about the recommendations from the study. If you recall, our purpose was to determine if we have a high-quality curriculum and if acceleration and enrichment benefit our students. So the experts were very clear when they talked about our curriculum. It's relevant and it's well sequenced. They also pointed out that rigor could be strengthened by including more application and mathematical practices into the curriculum itself. In terms of acceleration and enrichment, all students tended to benefit. We should make it clear, though, that all of our students typically, and I shouldn't say all, most of our students perform at a very high level either way. And so acceleration and enrichment just sort of adds to that. School level decisions. Here's an issue that we discovered. School level decisions about acceleration and enrichment have resulted in, one, some unintended differences in school and student participation across our schools. Sometimes it depends on what school you attend as a student that will dictate whether or not you have an opportunity for enrichment and acceleration. We also determined that there's greater variation than expected at the elementary school in terms of the amount of enrichment content that's provided. As Michelle showed you, even in our AAP centers, not all students are getting all of the enriched curriculum. I think one of the most important things that we discovered in this study was something we did not intend to discover at all. It just sort of emerged from the data, and it's this idea of productive struggle. And then we went back and looked at it and tried to define what it is we were seeing. And then the literature is described as effort to make sense of mathematics to figure out something that is not immediately apparent. From our focus groups and contacts with schools, this issue came out loud and clear. It's also defined as, or it's also observed that when engaged in productive struggle, students must grapple with concepts and come up with solutions, which forced them to develop some persistence and resilience. So in general, that's what we were observing, and we had to really go to the literature to get a good handle on what people were actually saying to us. So what did we find out about productive struggle? One, and the most important thing, is that there are different perceptions about it. School and teacher practices and experiences reflected some discomfort with the majority of the FCPS students participating in acceleration and enrichment opportunities. And again, as Leedy said, some of what we found is true across most school divisions. Teachers are very protective of students. They don't want students to feel too uncomfortable. And there's this line between how much struggle is productive and how much struggle is destructive for a student. And so relying on teachers to make that determination it's something that's a part of the professional practice. But when we look at what students and parents were saying, as Michelle pointed out, they want students to reach a certain point and have certain kinds of experiences that will only likely occur if they are put in classes that really push them, and they're going to experience this productive struggle. And so the idea here is, if there are different opinions, how do you get people on the same page in terms of expectations and acceptance of productive struggle? So related to these summary findings are some recommendations. And the first is a rewrite of the Regulation 3250. This rewrite should include all offerings of the advanced mathematics program at the elementary level must include all of those extended indicators as intended. And while a variety of factors may influence decisions for placing elementary students in advanced mathematics, quantitative aptitude has to be a primary determiner here. Also related to the regulation, the default placement for elementary students who are assessed at above quantitative aptitude should be advanced mathematics. And this is regardless of whether they have been identified to receive level 4 advanced academic services or not. And also related here is the recommendation to remove AP Calculus AB as a course offering at TJ. This is something the school is already aware of and has already started moving away from because of the overlap that this course is providing for courses that are already in place at TJ. So, some additional recommendations: modify the mathematics curriculum to include increasing the focus on students' development of conceptual knowledge and standards of mathematical practices. And when we talk about standards of mathematical practices, we're talking about standards that require students to make sense of problems and to persevere in solving and not allow students just to bail out when problems are difficult. Another recommendation related to modifying the curriculum has to do with raising the floor of the curriculum by requiring instruction, even in the standard curriculum, to include all of the current extended indicators, and then expanding the curriculum to include new and more rigorous extensions for the advanced learners. Leedy talked about the curriculum being well sequenced. This recommendation has to do with identifying those critical indicators that are missed even in a well-sequenced curriculum when students accelerate at a grade level between 3 and 8, to provide teachers with supplemental strategies to help them backfill instruction when students are accelerated. Almost there. Develop and execute a strategy to promote a common understanding and acceptance of this issue of productive struggle, so that parents and teachers and schools are on the same page with that. And lastly, to monitor and ensure division expectations are being followed at all schools for providing students with opportunities for rigor and acceleration in mathematics. And as Marty said, this is a summary report that cuts across at least 4 major technical reports. Those reports are available for you. We would be pleased if you wanted to see the technical analyses behind these reports, but they are available for you.
Done?
We're finished.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And we're also going to ask our friends from Instructional Services to come to the table, because there may be some questions around what we're doing currently with mathematics instruction that the team wouldn't be able to answer.
Okay, with that, I am.
Stay here because
I'll try to be as much as possible equal opportunity providers. So I'm gonna give each board member on my list in the first round 3 minutes. I have Mrs. Schultz to be followed by Mrs. McLaughlin, Mrs. Strauss, Ms. Evans, and Ms. Terna Koufax. 3 minutes each. Ms. Schultz.
So the question of the sequencing, I understand that the entire curriculum may be sequenced, but I have a couple questions about that. One, what are the results of SOLs to grades? I saw there was one correlation of grades, but are the grades in the classroom matching SOLs? 2, gaps. The sequencing gap that I imagine exists anecdotally is either school to school or pyramid to pyramid. And maybe a little bit that showed up in some of the graphs, it wasn't immediately apparent. So the question is, are we equally delivering curriculum opportunities from school to school? In the vernacular of Dr. Garza, eliminating pockets of excellence. And then if you go to slide 12, please. Slide 12, at the bottom of 12, criteria beyond aptitude. I'm sorry, I'm sure that says something, and I think it's probably trying not to say something, but I would appreciate knowing what that actually says, kind of plain English. Slide 16. If I understand that correctly, I'm just trying to understand. So 71% of students who were in accelerated math in elementary school wind up being in math 7 honors? Okay. And then just the last point is on perseverance/productive struggle. What is the methodology for working with staff, for staff to recognize the difference between, oh, you know what, they'll be fine, they'll get it, and they're about to fall off a cliff? Because I think that the problem, that is a professional development issue on our teachers actually recognizing that.
And I think the other piece to that is that not only is there the cliff, but there's also the student is struggling a bit, we may need to refer the student to a lower class. So there or a different class without as much rigor. So there's the other prong of that.
Let me start, and please jump in. You asked first if the grades match the SOLs. We did not examine the grades at all, and so we don't have a correlation or relationship between grades and SOLs for the study at all. And your second question was about, are there school-to-school differences in the delivery of the curriculum? Yes. I mean, that's one of the points we were trying to make, that we, depending on the rules that a school is operating by, they may give different opportunities for different extended indicators. And so, yes, there is variations across schools. You want to talk about aptitude?
The criteria beyond aptitude. When we asked schools what criteria they used, the number one methodology was teacher recommendation and some sort of rubric that they used in the classroom to make the determination. Very few used anything close to a standardized instrument.
And the aptitude is quantitative.
Quantitative
aptitude. That's the issue here. Are people using something other than a student's quantitative aptitude? Parent lobbying, teacher recommendations, a variety
Level 4
of things.
AAP status.
Content knowledge that the students may have already of the mathematics content. So tests and assessments are sometimes given as well.
What was it, 16? On slide 16?
Yes. The 71% of, yeah.
You
Sorry, I nodded. You are correct then.
You got that. I think you asked a critical question about productive struggle. And I would have to defer to the instructional folks, that balance between struggle and defeat. That's what you're essentially asking about.
So maybe we can kind of go two perspectives. One from Rose as our math coordinator, and then we have Tim Kasich, from Crestwood here, who can talk more at the school level. So I'll start with Rose.
So I think that the methodology for how we help teachers is important and something that we're working on right now. We know that we need to figure out the best way to not only educate parents and students, but also our teachers around what does productive struggle look like? When is it too much? When is it not enough? How do we help students really develop that deep understanding and help them go through that struggle versus they're in over their heads? And when is it appropriate for us to say, okay, you might want to take a step back? I think right now there's both of those things are happening at schools. Sometimes people are being asked to take a step back when they could.
In all due consideration, that's the part I'm worried about, is getting to the point where we're asking students to take a step back rather than proactively, because what that does is math confidence just goes off the deep end if we get them in that struggle, or they're winding up spending an hour and a half on 20 problems that other kids are doing in 30 minutes. Now it's too late. So it's the correct sequencing for that student all along, rather than, oh my gosh, they are, up to here, and now they're drowning, and you go to the parents and say, you know what, I think they need to ratchet back.
I agree that we don't want them to be over their heads. I think that we need to figure out like the best way to kind of educate everyone around that, because there will be times when parents choose to make decisions too, when it maybe goes against what teachers are seeing in the classroom and students get into that. But I do want Tim to kind of talk too about what he's been doing at his school with helping some of those kids reach that productive struggle.
So some of the conversations that we had before this school year centered around, implementing local level 4 services at Crestwood so that we could keep our kids at our school. We are a neighborhood school, and we wanted to make sure that they all had access to these advanced standards. When you implement local level 4 services, you typically start with a cohort of students in 3rd grade, and then you add each year. So it takes multiple years to have local level fully implemented at your school. But what we were seeing was that we had a group of 6th graders who were going off to middle school not having had access to this advanced curriculum, and it wasn't fair. We weren't giving them what they were entitled to. So where we were in our journey this year was we had a group of 6th grade teachers and 5th grade teachers who said, well, let's create a cohort. Let's flex out our math students. Let's pull some kids in and give them the opportunity with these advanced standards and these extended indicators. What we've seen so far has really been pretty amazing, and some of the results that I wanted to share with our 6th grade this year. 6th graders take the Iowa Algebra Aptitude Test. After having a half year of advanced curriculum, I had 90% of the cohort scored above the 50th percentile. Now, you need to be at the 85th percentile to be considered for advanced math when you get to Key Middle School. But we had 54% score above the 70th percentile, and this was only after 1 semester of advanced math. So my hope and my vision is that within a year or two, we're going to have these more and more children scoring at the 85th percentile on the Iowa test. Where some of the struggle was early on in our journey was exactly what we were just talking about. Where is the comfort level of creating discomfort for our children? When we think of accelerated math, we think we just have to keep moving fast. And if they're not getting it right away, well, that might mean that they're not ready. That's not necessarily the case. Coming back and spiraling back to the curriculum, giving them more and more opportunities has built that level of confidence for a lot of our children. And as we can see, I'm seeing positive results. I'm seeing teachers' attitudes toward advanced math change, and I'm very proud of the work that they're doing. So that was a lot said, and I hope I was clear.
Okay, thank you so much. Mrs. McLaughlin?
So having had 3 children who've recently been coming through the system, and all 3 of them had the accelerated math. 2 were school-based, and the other was in the center. The oldest ended up taking multivariable by his senior year. My second senior is now finishing Calculus BC as a senior. We made a conscious decision with our third son to just go with finishing up Calculus BC by your senior year. So I know we didn't really touch upon it in this report, but I do think it is something to be thinking about with all of this acceleration, helping parents understand if your child is not going into a STEM, field, why are we racing kids through to take Calculus BC by the end of their junior year? And that's a lot of what happened. So when I think of this math sequencing, what's concerning me at the elementary school level is, so my son now who's taking Calculus BC had all that accelerated math. But then the Iowa test back then, you had to have a 91 in order to go into Algebra 1. So he ended up taking Math 7 honors. And it was a complete lost year of math because he'd already had that at the elementary school. So I haven't heard us really talk about that, but that is the challenge. If you do compacted math in elementary school and you don't go into Algebra 1 as a 7th grader, Math 7 honors for some of these kids, at least that's what I heard, felt like it was just a repeat lost year. And I wondered if you could speak to that first. And then secondly, if I did hear the principal correctly, so is there a different threshold now to qualify on the Iowa in order to then take the 8th grade math SOL? Or is it different per school? But I mean, I was told you have to get a certain percentage on Iowa, or you won't even get to take the 8th grade math SOL for kids who felt that they were successful.
So the criteria is a 91 percentile on the Iowa. Some principals do take a little discretion and look at students that are close. So I think that there could be a close piece there, as well as I know that appeals come through to principals.
Well, I'll just tell you that when that happened with our second son, we were told, again, different administration, I mean, it was absolutely no way can your child take the 8th grade SOL. Doesn't matter what their performance has been. And it was a locked gate. And that is, just so you all know, one of the problems we have in terms of how it gets handled school by school. So the gate went down, no ability to even take the 8th grade SOL. And that as a parent and for the child was very frustrating. So in terms of fidelity of practice, Dr. Garza, I think just to be aware, I mean, maybe something has changed, but people in central administration backed up that decision and said, nope, you don't get 91, you don't get to take 8th grade SOL, you will take Math 7 honors and lose a year. And I'm just thinking about again, ideally it's the partnership between parents, students, guidance counselor, teachers. And before I run out of time, my second biggest concern that maybe you all hear, appreciate the report, but my experience I'm seeing is it is quality of instruction. We've got phenomenal math teachers at the high school level, and kids just absolutely shine. And then we've got some teachers who they just are struggling to deliver the curriculum to the kids, and it is by far the #1 subject that families are hiring tutors for not just 1 year, we're talking their entire child's high school year. And these are kids who end up scoring very high on the SAT. So it's not like there isn't math aptitude, but I don't know if you've been able to capture that, but it is my concern about, math is a difficult subject, but we've got some real variation, and I don't know if it's reaching you guys, but the volume of paid math tutors is alarming to me. And I do think it's something we need to be looking at.
So to address the Math 7 honors, and there has been a change since your one child was there, because we went from compacted to advanced math. And in compacted math, in 6th grade, they used to do the 7th and 8th grade content. In advanced math, they focus on the 7th grade content, and Math 7 honors is the 8th grade content. So noticing that there was a repeat, there's not the repeat, as well as Math 7 honors is really designed to help kids go deeper with problem solving and really understand some of that mathematics at a very deep level, so that they're able to use those mathematical practices and the process goals that were talked about earlier in the report. So students now only have the opportunity to take the Math 7 test. There's not 2 different SOL tests that happen at the 6th grade level. So that is something that has changed since your experience.
That's good. And the other thing I will say is when that same son advanced into 8th grade math, the teacher in Honors Math 7 recommended that 75% of the students not go to Algebra 1 Honors because of one single quiz. And we pushed forward, and he's had a very successful math career. But how many families trust the teacher who says, oh, based on this one quiz, you should take, algebra regular? And then as you guys have pointed out in this report, you are done for then. Because if you are not staying on the honors track, you can't get into pre-calc honors to then take the calculus, AB or BC. So it's really, what happens early on, you probably found in the report, can have a huge impact on where kids end up all the way through their high school careers. And so fidelity of guidance, I think, is absolutely crucial.
Okay, I have Mrs. Strauss next, to be followed by Ms. Evans, Ms. Delana Koufax, Ms. Hines, and Mr. Welkow.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much. And this is a wonderful example of a combination of using a consultant to take a good hard look at the curriculum as written, and then you all going in and actually looking at what I would see as delivery. So I'm very pleased with how the whole study was conducted. I think it gives us valuable information. So one of the questions, the difference between extension and acceleration, because I know we've talked about is math a race, and it's my understanding that what part of this look is trying to help students, whether it's struggle, but to get a deeper learning of mathematical concepts and not necessarily racing through with lots of tutoring a curriculum. And, how do we address that? So that's kind of extension versus acceleration. And then making sure that kids are not missing concepts, because I think that was one of the questions we had when we were looking at what was going on at TJ. Did we have students who were actually missing, either they hadn't done algebra in a couple of years and therefore they couldn't remember what they were doing when they got to Algebra 2, or whether or not they had missed concepts. And then Saturday, Dr. Garza, you were talking about compacted math and algebra for 6th graders, and whether or not, again, acceleration that perhaps denies kids the opportunity to go more deeply into the curriculum and then be more prepared for higher level math as they work their way through high school. So I guess those are the three pieces.
Yeah, I think the question that came up Saturday was, are we pushing our students? The question was, in some cases, are we pushing students? In fact, Ms. Evans, if you don't mind my pointing to you, I think you were the one that raised the question. Do we have some students taking Algebra 1 before they're really ready to take Algebra 1? Are we pushing students too aggressively?
Right.
That was the question.
The race.
From Saturday.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I would say to your question, I think in a lot of ways we're trying to hold back floodgates, because I think there's a lot of parents, probably the number one question that goes across Rose's desk is often about, why can't my 6th grade student take a test to show you they're ready for algebra, or my 5th grade student, or my 3rd grade student? So quite a bit of that is really trying to put in common sense ways that would allow students who are ready to go deeper in that curriculum, but those that maybe their parents think they're ready and they would benefit from just our regular sequence. So that it's a balancing act.
And then the difference between extensions within the curriculum, because I remember when at Audit you were explaining, there's a difference between extension and richness within the curriculum and then what true acceleration means, because it's a difference.
Probably the curriculum folks have something to say about that too, but when we did the literature review and we sort of looked at the concept of enriching versus accelerating, so for enrichment it was going deeper into the information and understanding the content more deeply, versus acceleration was doing it faster. Now here at the elementary level we really confound the two because we do both. We have them skip a grade basically in math, as well as get the extensions or the extended standards which have that deeper knowledge in it. So we do both simultaneously here, but they are distinct ideas in terms of curriculum.
But it's my understanding in the study, one of the recommendations was to make sure that in all classrooms at grade level that there was more attention paid to the extensions, because that takes all the students deeper into the curriculum, which then you have this tension with sort of the struggle to really understand what you were doing, and that it appeared that in some cases, we were not providing that opportunity for all students, which will then give them a deeper understanding of the mathematics.
Yes. This slide in particular shows at the elementary level how many of those extensions the schools were offering to students, and you can see that there's a range. The students in the red and the green were supposed to be getting all of them based on central office guidance, and the ones in the blue can get it sort of depending on what the teacher feels would be helpful or appropriate for them. So they are getting a range of the extensions, and developing that deep content knowledge would, in terms of our mathematics curriculum, require them to get as many of those as possible.
Thank you. Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I found all of these reports fascinating. And I think that it's an area we're just going to be able to scratch the surface today, of course, on all the information that we've been provided here. So thank you for doing these reports. I absolutely agree with the conclusion that any student who needs acceleration should have it no matter what school therein. My big question, of course, is how. If you have only 3 or 4 students in a grade that need acceleration, do we have a plan for how we're going to accelerate those students?
Yeah, so we do have a plan for how we want to accelerate those students when there may be only 3 or 4 students. I've been working very specifically with, it was Cluster 4, but now Region 3, around how do we help build access into those schools and looking at different models for schools to use. One model is that build that class of students, and at Crestwood, they built that class with students that would have been identified and some students that were high, but they weren't necessarily maybe identified before, and really taught up here and filled in the gaps, kind of had the expectation that they were going to reach this high level, and then went back and filled in those gaps for students that they may have had. Another method is really to differentiate, and so our curriculum documents allow us to look at the grade level standards that maybe all the students are getting, the above grade level standards that some of our students need in that classroom, and the extensions. And that's all spelled out in our curriculum documents so that teachers can teach the same kind of content. So if they're working on fractions, they'll work on 5th grade fractions and 6th grade fractions with the students that need it. So there's connection, but allowing those students that need it to go deeper at that level. So schools did that. There are some schools that also did some different small group pieces, but it's really about what's going to work for the staffing in the school, the teachers, and the students in that building.
And I get concerned when I hear that one model has students that are really at, well, actually both of those models have students that are at different levels. And so either a teacher has to differentiate, and I understand how differentiation can work quite well. In some subjects, I think it's harder in math, and I had some experience with this with my daughter in a differentiated class. And then the extensions, really that's not going faster, it's going farther out, and that's been a philosophy for a long time. We keep having this discussion in FCPS about, do you go up or go out? And so I really do hope that we find a model where every student that needs it really gets it in a good, robust way, and with a cohort that can accept the acceleration. So that's one point that we need to follow up. And this is possibly a little off field, although I found it fascinating that one of the research studies said that there's no strong evidence to support the U.S. sequence in math of algebra, geometry, and algebra 2 in high school over the integrated curricular sequence found in most other countries, that it's really just historical practice. So are we revisiting that at all? I mean, that was a kind of a stunning finding, frankly.
So it was interesting, when I was in the classroom, some of you may remember we adopted an integrated math curriculum. So this was early 2000s, and I actually taught that, and it was a really wonderful way to approach mathematics, and I really enjoyed it. It just, again, we bumped up against parents and community not understanding why their student was taking integrated 1 or integrated 2. They wanted that algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2 label. But I think we can look to our international baccalaureate schools who do follow a more integrated model in their IB classes, which I think is a wonderful approach.
In your professional judgment, is it better? I mean, is it actually better for our students?
I can personally say I think it's better.
Okay.
Again, though, we bumped up against the community and teachers who didn't embrace it.
The tradition. Sure.
And it actually, those students performed worse when we looked at the data, the schools in our integrated sequences, just because on average the teacher training around it's a little more.
Oh, sure.
Robust, so.
Take a transition. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you very much. I have 3 more board members on my list. Mr. Narcofax.
I do want to just mention that with what Ms. McLaughlin said about the Iowa test and the gatekeeping issue, that's been the experience that a lot of community members have told me about. So I'm glad to hear there is at least, because that was as Ms. McLaughlin said, a wasted year. And it's very, very difficult when you have a gatekeeping test like that just prohibits acceleration for maybe the wrong reasons. So I've talked about this for a long time. I sat on the AAP committee. We talked about that back then, and so at least there's been some change. But I'm still not certain, and I'm just speaking from community disenchantment with the Iowa test and the results that it brings and the angst that it brings. I don't know if there's a better model for that. So I ask that of you. If there is, can it be some combination of things? But my other question is, I think you spoke of the unintended differences for the enrichment, and it brings a great deal of variables to the schools. I'm thinking that may be the case, but I'm hopeful. There's been a school in my area that consistently, and this year I heard from a parent whose child is in TJ, and that's but one data point of math curriculum, but saying that the majority of children who came from this middle school it was requested by TJ administration that they get into remedial math, and this has been a consistent problem with this middle school and the sequencing in this pyramid. So my question is, how can we address this? This is not a new problem. This has been going on for years in this pyramid with this group, and going on for years. And I was shocked and saddened to hear that still this very year, when this parent met with me, that the group that went, maybe there were 10, 12 students that went from that particular school, but about 8 of them, all of them were recommended. 2 did not take the recommendation. But is it enrichment? What is it? It's consistent, and how can we address it?
I think around that, a good first step would be for us to get together and talk about vertical articulation, that maybe some of the TJ teachers, some of the middle school teachers, we could facilitate that so they could start to have those conversations. And I think, in different pyramids where we have facilitated that, even just between a high school, not even TJ, you really do see them talking across the lines and what level of expectations.
Well, for me, TJ provides the data point, but it's obviously the curriculum within that whole area. TJ allows me to give you that data point.
Right.
But it's my concern is for the entire grouping of kids who've gone through that system, that area.
Right. That's where I would start with is getting the teachers together, really talking about it, thinking about what it is. We could take a look at the different lesson plans and assessments that they're delivering, seeing if they're up to the level of rigor that we would want them to be sure delivering our curriculum.
I would greatly appreciate that very much.
The couple other things that we can do besides some of this work around the curriculum, which we need to do, I thought all the recommendations were, very strong ones, is we can do what's called essentially rigor audits, or you can actually train a group of people to go and do random classroom observations to determine whether or not the level of rigor that's, some people think rigor is just more or harder, and that's not what we're suggesting here, but I think there's ways for us to do a non-threatening kind of check of our system to see whether or not the standards for various courses across the system are at the same. There's ways to do that. We are collecting evidence to suggest, does this really exist in terms of, who's having to take remedial kinds of acceleration maybe at TJ. I think also what we've seen in some cases is we probably need to look at how, and also at the same time we look at this alignment, which I think is valuable. I think it's also looking at kind of the practices there at TJ and determine whether or not that may be appropriate on that end as well. Okay? Because I think sometimes too, unilaterally we can make decisions that don't go deep enough to determine why, in fact, a student may be struggling, versus kind of reteach and addressing some of those challenges within the classroom versus segmenting out groups of students and parsing those out for some reason.
I understand that. I appreciate it. I'll work offline with you in any way I can.
Okay, Thank you. I have Ms. Hines to be followed by Mr. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to thank you all so much for being willing to sort of ask these tough questions and then, publicize the answers, because I think that's obviously the first step toward improving what we're doing. And we do have achievement gaps. We know that, and it is definitely our job to figure out why they're there and where they're coming from and what we can do about it. I think that equitable access to an appropriately challenging math curriculum should be one of our primary closing achievement gaps goals, and something that I would just like to make sure that we measure, which I assume we'll do, that we get some feedback about how, once these recommendations are implemented, that we see what happens with this. I think I had a couple questions. The charts, particularly on pages 12 and 13, and then again on 16, which show the gaps in access to challenging math curriculum. Do we have that data? And I haven't delved into the larger reports, but do we have that data broken out by socioeconomic subgroups?
It is not currently in the report, these data broken out by demographics at this point.
Okay, all right. Would that be difficult?
Yeah, it's doable. It's just not in the report at this point. So if you're making a request, we can do that.
Well, I guess I would, but I can't sort of unilaterally as one board member request that. But I think it might be interesting for us to know. We know that access depends on what building you're in, but does it also depend on your socioeconomic group as well when we look at the data? So could we, if it's not a big deal?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay.
We can provide that.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, we all understand that teachers need a lot of support. I think when you talk about rigor and challenging kids, I think those are, teachers making well-meaning assumptions and trying to do what's best for kids. But it's also, from what I hear, teachers having 30-plus kids in a room and trying to differentiate and trying to meet needs, and having a curriculum that's moving too fast. There's like too much on the plate. So I hear that you're getting that the teachers need a lot of support for this, and curriculum supports and all that. So that's good. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Welcome.
So, Craig, you made me think that I need a T-shirt that says IB for everyone. So I've inferred, there's a good mathematical term, I've inferred that the method that we use for quantitative aptitude measurement is the Iowa test? No. Okay.
We use the COGAT, which is administered to all second grade students.
Okay.
This division also administers the Neglieri. We just chose to use the COGAT for the purpose of this study.
Okay, and does that differentiate between aptitude and mere exposure in the child's life up to that point?
It is intended to be aptitude.
Because aptitude suggests something that's innate. Okay, I won't persist with the point. I continue to be puzzled that Algebra 2 is a graduation requirement. And I totally get productive struggle, but it seems to me you could go through the productive struggle just as well with statistics, logic, applied math, all kinds of stuff. I mean, obviously, if you're going into a STEM career, of course you need Algebra 2 and calculus and all that kind of stuff, but I still wonder about this. So finally, I just want to make sure I think the bottom line from this study is that we could be delivering a much more rigorous curriculum to many more students than we are right now. Is that the bottom line?
I think that's definitely one of the bottom lines. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other board member who hasn't spoken yet? Okay. Mrs. Reed.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and I guess I want to try to understand some of the other takeaways here. One is teacher workload that has been alluded to here. I think based on some of these bar graphs, it looks like whether you're in a general ed program, an AAP level 4 or AAP center, there's differentiation going on all over the place anyway, right? So I guess my question is, does this make you think about how we're organized and whether in certain, I'm being very inarticulate, it's late, whether an AAP center, for example, should be offering a different curriculum than the level 4 or the regular. I mean, on its surface, that kind of seems that way, right?
So the curriculum written down is the same. I think it's how far teachers take those extensions within those different classrooms based off of the student readiness and maybe their content knowledge or their background. But a level 4 student should be receiving the same curriculum across the board. And I know that's showing that they're not. So we have work to do with our teachers around PD, around how do we help them develop and go deeper with that, as well as the last bar graph that shows those students at a regular elementary school in advanced math, if they are not getting the extended because they're getting the grade level above, they still need to get those extended. I know that my office has work to do around how do we help develop teachers and help them see how to do that in those classrooms.
So I think it's a multitude of different things that can help. I think it's more training for our teachers. It's also, great leadership like Tim, who's really, I think, facilitated some conversations that have had teachers think differently about some of the work. But I think there's also some configurations that also help. Flexible grouping, right, I think, is also a great way to help teachers because they are asked to do a lot in terms of differentiation. So particularly at the elementary level where things are much more flexible, it's flexible grouping helps, particularly in mathematics, so that you're able to, take students a little farther that could go farther and respond to students' needs in different ways, as long as we don't lock them into those certain groups.
Well, that's kind of the point, I think, is that I'm hearing just anecdotally that some of the elementary schools have very different practices for how they manage that. And so it does kind of make you wonder, I mean, is it appropriate to just let the principals and the teachers decide how they want to manage that? Or at some point should we say, staff say the best practice is really doing it this way, such as if a child is strong in math, they should be put in that group for math, but if they're not as strong in another area, is that what you're kind of referring to when you talk about the ability groupings?
I've always thought it's best to develop and enhance capacity to improve the judgment of our practitioners at the school level. It's always very, very difficult if we, to actually dictate from a central office perspective, do this, do this, do this, because we can't, it goes back to judgment. I think of some earlier conversations that professional judgment of the teacher will always be mission critical along with their leadership team. So I do think sharing best practices, showing models of how do you effectively do it, I think goes a long, long way. But we'll always have some variation just because the needs of schools and different communities are different. And so we need to provide some opportunity to be different and allow some flexibility and give teachers some say, how to do it.
Well, I don't know. I just feel that we've heard from the teachers for years about workload. I mean, it's making me anxious just hearing the discussion. I'm not even a teacher. To try, as we talk about the classes getting larger and more diverse, to assume that our teachers with some training would be able to. I'm not sure I'd even want them to teach in the traditional way, unless we had some additional supports or some different ways of doing things. I know one of my schools is now going to more of a homeroom approach in the elementary level, where then they go to different classes based more on ability, but that gets away from the perception issue that some of the kids have about, that's the smart group, and, the rest of us. So that's another issue I'm just throwing out there. I'm not sure we need to discuss it. But as we talk about these different levels and how kids reach the bar where it's set, I really, from my point of view, I value the idea of making that available to as many kids as possible and not burdening our teachers in the process. So it sounds like you all are doing the yeoman's work here to try to figure out how to do that. But I haven't heard anybody say they're in disagreement. We want to try to make kids as accessible as possible to the curriculum. But in my mind, and my last point, and then I'll be quiet, is it's kind of the uber achievers. And, are we, as we try to meet the needs of everybody, in the end, are we meeting the needs of those children as well? That's more of a philosophical question. At this late hour, I don't expect anybody to answer that. But it does, again, with our bell curve, it does kind of beg the question.
That doesn't require a response, does it? With that, anybody else, before I do one go back, very short, go back to Mrs. McLaughlin.
So I do want to sort of touch on a little bit what Mr. Velkoff said about Algebra 2, because I have been hearing that is a unique type of math curriculum, and really why are we making that the benchmark? And I know it might be because of Virginia standards, but I think then we need to be leading on that conversation if, in fact, that's not necessarily a relevant requirement for all students in pathways to graduation. But also to what Ms. Evans brought up, and I did spend over an hour and a half with a geometry teacher who was talking about Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, and she also teaches the Algebra 2, and had a notable number of students who were failing, and that's a big deal, especially for our seniors. She mentioned the old Algebra 2 textbook used to have review chapters, that because students took Algebra 1, then there's a year gap when you're taking geometry, and then back to Algebra 2. And so some teachers would review the Algebra 1, foundational curriculum to then move to Algebra 2. But then apparently became sort of a choice among math departments if you wanted to go that route or if you just launched right into Algebra 2. And I wondered if you could speak to that, because I do have concerns based on what this teacher shared with me that this could be a compounding problem for our students being successful in Algebra 2 when there is that year gap, plus you don't have a textbook that allows the refresher. Are you aware of this problem, and what, if anything, is being done about it?
So I think what you're referring to is that we did have, I think at one point, 2 schools that did an Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and then geometry sequence. Is that what you're referring to? No?
No,
Sorry.
what I meant was that you still did Algebra 1, then geometry, then Algebra 2. But the students who were taking Algebra 2 had a Algebra 2 textbook that had Algebra 1 review chapters in the beginning, so that the teachers could kind of review and refresh students with the algebra principles before they launched into Algebra 2. But that became sort of, some did, some didn't. Sounds like now that the chosen math textbook doesn't do that at all. And I'm wondering if that's making it more difficult for our students to be successful in Algebra 2 than what we saw in the past.
So I would just say that I think there's kind of a couple different scenarios with that. For one, a lot of the textbook companies, because they want to be relevant across all the different states, they would pack everything into one book. So they'd have a lot of Algebra 1 content in the beginning. We did find that some schools, not a lot of them, and some teachers were actually just spending half the year on Algebra 1, and then we never got to the content of Algebra 2, and the kids weren't doing well at that point either. So a lot of the things around bringing in pacing guides and trying to keep people up so that they would get to that content was a struggle we had about 4, 5, 6 years ago. So that's just some of the scenarios.
I mean, this is a teacher who's teaching it right now, and she's telling me they don't review Algebra 1 at all when they start the beginning of the year. So that's what I'm trying to understand is, as a school system and from instructional services, is it just the guidance to our teachers of, sorry, the kids haven't seen it in a year, launch right into Algebra 2, or is this an issue of fidelity of what different schools might be doing?
So we have Jen Allard here, our high school specialist. So I wonder if you'd come up to the microphone, Jen, and talk a little bit about the curriculum at Algebra 2, because I know that there is some built-in Algebra 1 materials.
Well, it's built in the sense that almost everything that you do in Algebra 2 is built on Algebra 1. So we do not have anything in the program of studies or the pacing guide that is an Algebra 1 standard, because that's Algebra 1. So to put it in there specifically to say you should teach this Algebra 1 content because students need it for Algebra 2 is almost saying we don't expect them to carry it from Algebra 1. So it's not in there. However, the idea is that you review as you need it. If you, at the beginning of the year, try to cram a whole year of Algebra 1 review, something that took them the whole year to learn, and try to do it in a couple of weeks to get ready for the content, they don't need every bit of that right away. There's a bunch of different concepts. There's stuff about linear equations, there's stuff about quadratic equations, there's stuff about graphing, there's stuff about functions. So the idea is to do sort of the as-needed review and say, okay, today we're going to talk about linear equations. Here's what you should know about linear equations. Now, yes, in different schools they do it differently. Some schools use a very successful, pre-test, post-test model. Some don't. But the idea is to do it as needed.
That's excellent information. I mean, I can really appreciate what you're describing, and then I think it just goes to what I know Dr. Garza is committed to doing, which is having best practices carried out with fidelity, so that depending on which school your child goes to, you hopefully will have what you just described, getting each time you come to the next part of Algebra 2, that you've had a review. But I will tell you, to the thing you talked about earlier with, what is it, project resistance? What was you were talking about?
Mrs. McLaughlin.
Yeah, productive. That's a nuanced situation, because when kids are failing and then the teachers just say, yeah, but this is good for you to learn how to fail, you kind of, it's finding that balance.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, this work session is adjourned. Next step is just one request from Ms. Hines to staff, which staff agreed to provide demographic information on slide number 12 and 13, correct? 12, 13, and 16? Okay, I missed one slide then.
And broken out by FRM and non-FRM.
Demographic.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, thank you so much. We'll take a 3-minute break, and then Mr. Church.